Hi, welcome to part 5 of Learning to Learn at Home, Scaffolding Independent Learning. This word scaffolding is used widely within the teaching profession, and very simply it refers to the process by which we provide young people with the support and the guidance that they need for as long as they need it, until we're able to gradually withdraw that support and allow them to stand on their own 2 feet and do things for themselves. It's neatly summed up in this quote by the developmental psychologist Lev Vygotsky, who said that what a child can do with assistance today, he or she will be able to do by themselves tomorrow. So it's a very simple idea. And in this video, we're going to look at 3 simple ideas for providing young children with that scaffolded support and guidance, and then gradually withdrawing it over time. We're going to look at ground rules, discussion guidelines, and systems and routines. So ground rules, in case you aren't aware, simply means rules that you come up with yourself, rules that you come up with from the ground up, if you like. And it comes from baseball. So in baseball, there are obviously rules of baseball that apply across all baseball games, but then there are sometimes local ground rules. So for example, this picture is of Wrigley Field, where the Chicago Cubs play, and as you can see across the back wall there's ivy, and so they have a local ground rule that if the ball gets stuck in the ivy, then all the players move forward 2 bases, and if the ball falls back out, then it remains in play. So it basically just means local rules that you come up with yourself. And it is important that you go through a process with your child of coming up with some rules that work for you. These should not be imposed in a top-down way, but the child should be involved in this process. So you come up with a set of ground rules that set out how you're going to work together for as long as it takes for the child to be able to do things by themselves. Here are some examples of ground rules that you might want to use. These work for me and my son, but they might not work for you. Feel free to take them or leave them as you wish. First of all, we will agree systems for organising what needs to be done, and this can take quite a lot of time. We'll talk about systems in a minute. It can take quite a bit of time to find systems that work for you. We're going to talk about time blocking in a few minutes and how we use that to create a daily timetable, how we organise his schoolwork in terms of a to-do list and also physically in terms of organising it in ring binders and so on, and also in terms of managing distractions. We have a system whereby we meet each day at the end of each day to review how the day went and to make a plan for the next day, to think about whether we need to tweak our plans as we move from one day to the next. Each week we have a longer conversation where we look at how the systems are working in general and whether there's anything that we need to do differently. And there's a ground rule there just to make really clear that we will run these systems together until the child is able to do them by themselves. So it's there as a really regular reminder. It's also a good idea to have ground rules that govern how we talk together. This is especially useful for parents of more than one child if you're working together, to set really clear expectations for how we talk together, to make sure that when we talk together it's productive. And again, you would go through a process of coming up with a set of discussion guidelines for you and your children. So first of all, we have typical ideas like we take turns to speak, everybody listens carefully to each other, but that's easier said than done, isn't it? And you might want to do a little bit of work around what does good listening look like and how can we improve our listening skills. We will not shy away from saying what we really think, so it's really important that we have robust conversations, and that if anybody's not feeling good about what's being said, that they feel free to air those views so that we really get to know what one another is thinking. We give reasons for our thinking, so we're looking for that word because. We build on one another's ideas, which again is a good sign that we're listening to each other. And then there's things like we challenge one another's ideas. Children sometimes struggle with that, so they might say something like, "No offence, but," and then they just go on to say something offensive. But they get better at that in time. And we will try to work towards agreement. That's a really important one. So not just agree to disagree too easily, but really try to reach some common ground through negotiation and compromise and so on. As a teacher, using discussion guidelines was probably the most transformative thing that I ever did in terms of my classroom practice. Absolutely transforms the quality of talk in a really short space of time. So that's something that you might want to consider. Systems and routines are probably the most important idea, the most important vehicle, if you like, that will get us to where we want to be. There are lots of productivity gurus out there who write books with names like Getting Things Done and the Checklist Manifesto. But essentially, what's important is that you experiment with a bunch of different approaches and find out what works for you and for your particular child at this particular point in time. One idea that lots of people find useful, and that I also find useful, is the idea of time blocking. So that rather than just putting individual things into your diary, that at 2 o'clock I'll do this or at 4 o'clock I do this, that you actually have a sense of what you're going to be doing at every point throughout a day. So this is the one that I currently use with my son, and it changes from week to week. When I first started doing this with my son, we had a timetabled approach, and then we found that that didn't really work, and then we tried something that was a lot more flexible, and then we found that that didn't really work either, and we went back to timetables, and now that is working for us. And so it might not work straight away, but stick with it. And then to zoom into those schoolwork time blocks, we go through that process of populating a table once a week where we look at the things that he's set by his teachers and emails that he's received, and we put them into one place, and then we can order that list according to how long that thing will take, when's it due by, and so on. It's essentially a to-do list, but by having a sense of how long each thing will take, we can figure out which bits of schoolwork to put into those 3 schoolwork slots in a day. So for a little while, we were running 2 timetables. My son had a time blocking timetable for the day and then this schoolwork timetable, but he found that it was quite confusing having the 2. And so now we combine the 2 together, so we have this expanded version of the time blocking timetable with the actual details of what needs to be done at each step along the way. So as I say, this is an ongoing process, finding the system that works for you. It might take a little while, but it's really worth persevering with. And there are other systems that you might like to have in place. One thing that children often really struggle with is how to organize their physical work. And so having ring binders and using dividers and punched pockets and reinforcement hoops and all of that stuff, it's really important that they learn those skills early on, because when they come to GCSE and A-level, if they haven't got those organizational skills in place by then, they can find it really, really difficult to organize their time and their resources later on. And you might also want to have systems in place for managing distractions, for example, putting your phone off or putting it on silent or putting it in a different room. Again, that's for you to experiment with. And it's important that you run these systems until they're built in to become a normal part of your daily routine. So I'll wrap up with 3 top tips for how we go through this process of putting these systems and supports in place and then withdrawing that support over time. Number 1, to set the destination, independent learning, and to refer to it regularly. You might want to have it in one of the ground rules, but it's really important to be clear about the direction of travel. Number 2, thinking back to the parent-adult-child model we looked at in episode 4, the idea of ground rules is really to enable adult-to-adult interactions, as well as to remind yourselves of this scaffolding approach that we're going to do this for as long as it takes for the child to reach that destination of being a confident, curious, independent learner. And lastly, to create those systems to decide what needs to be done, by when, in what order. And there's 3 parts to that really. Number 1, you've got to come up with systems that work for you. Number 2, you run them together for as long as it takes for them to become routine, for them to become automated, because then that takes the effort out of it. If it just becomes a habit, if it becomes as unthinking as brushing your teeth or putting your shoes on before you leave the house, that's when you've really cracked it. And finally, just to reiterate that point, that we gradually withdraw our support over time. So it might be that we ask the child to run the system just for one day to see how they get on by themselves, and then building our way up to a whole week of independent learning. So that's it in a nutshell. It's a very simple idea, scaffolding, but it's probably the most powerful idea that we're going to talk about in this course, because this is really the vehicle in which we can move from dependent learning to independent learning, from co-regulation to self-regulation. So that's it, scaffolding independent learning, using those simple ideas of ground rules, discussion guidelines, systems and routines, and then gradually withdrawing that support over time to enable greater independence for your child. Thank you for watching. Please do let us know how you're getting on. You can either comment publicly or you can message us privately. We'll be really happy to hear from you. Until next time, take care.